Hello there and welcome to the top 10 most likely unseen issues for the Jord Homes MCS May 2019 here with Astranti. So this video is going to break down the top 10 issues that we think are most likely to come up in the exam, but also just the key points from the pre-scene that we need to be wary of, and we have to factor in that there will be some unseen material that factors in here on top of what we know. So again, this is about the most likely issues to arise with some new material. So why do I choose each and every one from 10 to 1? Well, the first thing we consider is the focus in the pre-scene, and this largely correlates to the space in terms of raw pages associated to the issue and degree of importance attached to it by the examiner, because we have done a lot of these case studies, of course, and we're quite familiar with what the examiner is more commonly going to test. Alongside this, we will consider the strategic importance and how we come up with these issues, the importance to the SWOT analysis, so that's our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and the importance to be likely to be attached by directors of the business, so what the business is aiming to do and how that relates to these issues. And finally, not only just me, but also Astranti as a whole have a vast experience in the pre-scene analysis, and we've got a very, very good history of predicting usually 6 or more of these topics coming up, which, to be honest, based on just the pre-scene, is quite a great, feature of our analysis. So we've also done a lot of the past exams. We know all the typical issues, and we also, from a mock exam writing perspective, know how easy it is to write issues on that subject. And you may wish to, doubt it, but ultimately the examiner is looking for an easier time on themselves as well. So they're not going to build these hyper complex questions. They're going to want to write some nice easy ones for their time as well. So that does come into it as well. So how do we prepare for these issues? Well, the first thing we need to consider from the pre-scene is how key models are associated to the information we're given. And we have to remember that we have to adapt all modules for the new points in the unseen material. So never forget the fact that we've got some new material that has to be added on top of what you currently understand, and it will have to adapt. It might disprove something that we believe to be true based on the pre-scene, or just change something that is true in the pre-scene and won't be in your unseen exam material. Then we have to, of course, practice our technique and understand how we can not only write the exams but also apply these issues in a mock exam scenario. And then we want to try and find some relevant real life examples, which is quite common at the end of the industry analysis document. We've got a load of real life examples there, and we can prepare sample paragraphs, just as a revision tool, so that we can all understand how we go about the exam and implement these real life examples, which help to reinforce your answer. Then you need to learn them. So once you've done these prepared sample paragraphs, you can then learn them, and you're ready to go on that topic in terms of getting those top marks. And most importantly is learn the typical key points of each model, the advantages, the disadvantages. Most of the time when we're talking about models, we will have to discuss the pros and cons to them and how that applies to the scenario. So never forget that there will be disadvantages to what you ultimately put on the page. And also be prepared for which models to use for each issue. So whilst we need to remember our key models, we need to know where to apply them. There's no point knowing Pestle fantastically for this case if you're applying Pestle to a question that doesn't, cover Pestle at all. So we need to make sure we're very targeted with these. So with that said, apologies for that. So with that said, let's move on now to issue 10. And unsurprisingly, based on our need to grow, new project is one of the top 10 issues at number 10. And the basis of the choice is not only the fact that we need to grow as a business, or there's a conflict rather between the institutional shareholders wanting to grow and the last ones not, but typically this is going to ultimately come down to new projects. The examiner is not going to put that message into the unseen the pre-scene rather, without following that up with some exam focus. So we know there'll be some new projects, but also it's very common in past exams. It's just a key topic, it's part of the role. It's just one of those things that is always going to come up. And given that we've got a very specific mention in the pre-scene of how we need to grow, which means new projects, this is a shoo-in. We've also got the fact that it's very easy to provide financial information for you to analyse to ensure that you understand F2. If you recall, the MCS and all other case studies do not require you to do any calculations, but obviously the examiner needs to find a place in which to test you on F2. And one of these ways in which they do so is by incorporating financial information into a new project question. So that is also a key reason as to why a new project is likely to come up. And finally, it links to both risk and funding issues, so they can cover all three of the modules for the MCS all in one question. So it's a really appealing topic for the examiner, and it's really hinted at in the pre-scene. So with that said, what are the likely issues? Well, of course, we've got a new product, we need to diversify. So that could be the landscaping we saw in video 6. If you haven't checked that out, ultimately at the end of the pre-scene, there is a number of articles. There's a landscaping opportunity demonstrated by Lovely Homes, and there is also the fact that we've built a hotel as Jord Homes. It is a little bit delayed, so there'll be some issues there which we need to consider, but ultimately we're diversifying with a new product away from homes, but sticking to our branding of quality, top-notch buildings. We also have to consider that there's a wider demand for prefabs that are centering on this affordability aspect. Whether we pivot strategically is a question mark, and that's a different issue, but in terms of new project, it's a possibility. And ultimately, there's just lots of opportunity to grow. Could be new markets, market penetration, market development as part of Ansof's matrix. There's just so much in terms of how we have lots of opportunity. And this, again, we haven't got the same points in new project underneath it, but new project relates very similarly to the points we've got under new product. A new project for growth, and ultimately, that could be building a factory, setting it up, etc., just to sort of increase our capacity, for example, because more capacity and more demand equals more revenue, etc. So we need to grow, and there's just so much there to talk about in terms of a new project. So what do we need to talk about as far as a new project is concerned? Well, first and foremost, we have to consider the NPV of the project. Now, if they give us some financial figures, they will likely incorporate some aspect of evaluation. Typically, they'll give us an NPV value for each, or give you, a very strong hint as to which is the most, favorable NPV. There might be some, drawbacks. Maybe one's high risk and one's medium risk. And then we also have to consider, is it consistent with our CSR principles? We know branding is super important. So if we do not adhere to our principles, we'll damage the brand, which will actually harm profitability in the long run. So we really need to retain our branding and make sure that any new project fits our principles. Alongside this, it needs to fit our strategy. There is that question mark of strategy, given that there are several opportunities that are very different from each other available to Jord Homes for growth. That is a big question mark, but if that is decided or based on our current strategy, is it consistent with it? Because typically you don't want to make a new project or undergo a new project rather that is not consistent with your strategy, because it's not in your comfort zone, it doesn't fit your overall business at the moment, and it has a slew of issues that could come about, such as poor management, change management issues, inefficiencies, supplier issues. They could work in absolutely any issue if we are taking on a project that doesn't fit the strategy, and those are the things that could arise as drawbacks in general. So with that said, we then have to consider, is it consistent with our critical success factors? We know that innovation and skills, knowledge, are very critical. We want our staff to be the very best. We want to innovate as a business using the best materials, the best technology, using the best staff. We have a really strong reputation, our brand, which we need to really adhere to, and part of protecting that brand and reputation is customer service. So we need to make sure that all these critical success factors, along with, say, sustainability, because of prefab's perks, we need to make sure that our new projects fit our CSFs. If they're not achieving our CSFs, well, it's not a very good project potentially. And then, as we get to the end of our project evaluation, how will it be funded? We have to always question, how do we get the money to do certain things? So if there's any hint that they're asking about how it might be funded as well, we can consider that they've got no debt, for example, etc. But we do always have to keep that in mind, and if the examiner's hinting or specifying that they want a mention of the funding, do not be afraid to address the issue alongside the project, because things like how we fund it are going to be very, very impactful on the overall success of the project, but also the success of the business, because we can't overspend, for example, or we might have a poor liquidity if we use cash, etc. So right at the end, we're going to talk about, we have to make a recommendation even if you're not asked to do so. Now, it's not a strict rule. If you're really struggling, okay, fine. But if you do have a recommendation to make based on your previous, paragraphs of answer, it's very, very important, especially in this case, because we're very, very close to the finance director, and she has a lot of responsibilities, namely strategic ones. And it does say that they'll delegate to us, to some degree. That implies that there'll be a little bit more strategic thinking involved, even though it is the management level. It's nothing to be scared of, but all it means is when we're asked a question, it might be about which project is the best option based on our critical success factors, for example, and we want to recommend one at the end, even if it was more a case of evaluate the critical success factors and our projects that are available. That doesn't inherently ask you to tell which one's the best. It says just evaluate them, give the pros and cons of each. But at the end, you should make a recommendation, include a short justification, and include the key action points that will follow this decision to take the project forward. Do keep it brief. You don't need to go overboard on it. It's not like a whole essay in itself, but it's very, very useful to pick up the best marks is to make a recommendation at the end. And I suspect there will be some questions that actually require you to as we go through. So now we're on to value chain efficiencies. This is issue number 9. And the reason that we are discussing value chain efficiencies is because there is a market penetration opportunity. It links to this new project / growth opportunity aspect that we've covered in not only in the pre analysis videos, but already discussed a little bit in issue 10. We have the opportunity to cut some costs, offer cost savings to our customers to increase our overall sales, which then will increase our growth and profit because we're getting more of them. It's about penetrating the market. You pair lower costs with lots and lots of marketing, and that can enable you to grow your domestic market or your current market to a larger size. And that opportunity is very, very clear throughout the pre-scene. It is one of the key avenues of growth that are available for Jord, alongside diversifying, alongside new products, alongside developing markets abroad. So with a market penetration opportunity, to get cost savings, you need to find efficiencies. You need to cut costs or add more value, which makes the overall cost of better things less to your customer. These are the value chain efficiencies that are going to allow you to do so. In the same way that cutting costs on the existing quality is the same as a better quality at the current price. So either way, making sure the value of the customer receives from our services and products, they're going to be higher or at a cheaper rate or at the current rate based on it being higher, then we have, this idea of creating efficiency. So that was a roundabout point, and I do apologize. However, that is one of the key things we need to think about. And we have affordable homes have a high demand. We saw that very clearly. I think it was the housing minister for Corvola. They're looking to build a load of houses, 100,000 over 4 years, I believe. And this ultimately translates to there's a huge demand for affordable housing. Could we potentially create a value chain that can accommodate a budget option that fulfills this demand? That again is that strategic pivot opportunity that's available. It's almost like diversification to some degree because you're moving very, very far away from your core business, but it's the same market, so not quite. But ultimately, it's about, stepping away from our strategic point, our current market position, and offering that other alternative for these affordable houses. Whether that's a good idea will come down to a project question. But in terms of value chain efficiencies, again, we're looking for the lowest cost. So again, value chain efficiencies, getting the best out of your processes for the least cost is essentially the idea there. And finally, the reason which value chain efficiencies comes up quite a lot is because decision making is part of earning leadership marks, and they're sort of strewn here and there throughout your different questions in the exam. So it's a nice way for the examiner to squeeze those in. So I would expect this to come up. So what are the likely issues? Well, where do we achieve further efficiencies? Do we automate more, for example? Can we, cut the cost of this material by going to this supplier instead? Can we implement economies of scale? So it's quite a narrow topic, but there may be a lot of unseen material on it that informs you about how to discuss this topic in a wider, broader way for the question. So you'll have to see in the exam, but ultimately I do suspect this is a likely issue in one or two of the variants that are tabled on the exam. So what should we talk about in terms of value chain efficiencies? Well, we need to talk about the value chain and how it works in general. So for example, you want to see how it goes through the different chain, how it implements into each other, how it generates further cost savings, and all those kinds of time savings. We're going to go into the value chain in depth in the strategic analysis. So if you haven't looked at that yet, feel free to take a look and we'll go through it. If you want to pause this and look at the value chain section, I can completely understand. Otherwise, we can just go over it with the strategic analysis afterwards. But ultimately, the implication of strategic decisions on the value chain, such as automation, for example, is again something we need to discuss. We want to be on the cutting edge, but what if the cutting edge makes half our staff redundant or creates a new issue where you need some human input despite the fact, automation is so much cheaper in the actual process? And also just areas of possible efficiencies, such as lower cost materials, outsourced distribution, because we know that they have their own sort of supply chain in terms of getting the house from the factory to the build site. That could maybe be outsourced for a cheaper cost. Would it be reliable? Question mark. We'd have to see. That could be a question in itself. However, these are the key issues we have to think about for the value chain. Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else a strategy do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene's on the oil industry, The industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.